We don't get to celebrate many victories in energy policy these days, but there is one. Chalumbin Hill, that beautiful piece of tropical forest in far north Queensland, has been saved. The Energy Minister last month decided that the environmental cost of bulldozing into this beautiful piece of natural vegetation with the loss of habitat for wildlife was too high. With me on the line is Stephen Nowakowski, who was really one of the leading lights in the campaign to save Chalumbin. I spent a bit of time with him last year. He showed me around Chalumbin and I was appalled by what I saw. Stephen, I know you've got a lot more battles to fight when it comes to renewable energy, but you must have allowed yourself just a little bit of celebration on. You must have celebrated just a little on this one.
Yeah, that's right. It was all fairly surreal. And it seemed like a bit of a joke to start with. We didn't know if it was actually real or not, because there was never really a press release per se that came out from the minister. But once we realised that it was true that Chalumbin had been knocked over, not probably the way that we wanted it to be knocked over by the minister, but by the proponent walking away, we did celebrate, and we actually had a bit of a celebration last Saturday night up at Ravenshoe, and the community got together and celebrated the victory. We know that these victories are few and far between. This was a really David versus Goliath campaign. And last Saturday, we got together and drew a line under the campaign and celebrated the fact that we won this issue. But also, too, in these campaigns, you meet some beautiful people, and we've all made lifelong friends as well.
Well, there are some terrific people up there. I got to know quite a few of them myself, Stephen. But look, I mean, the point is this, that the minister had indicated to the developer that she wasn't going to approve it. She had weighed up the environmental cost, the actual cost to the landscape, to the animals, to the vegetation, against the supposed benefit from renewable energy, and she'd said that the costs outweighed the benefits. Now, this is significant to me. This is the first time that I'm aware of that a Labor minister has actually made this decision. This means surely that every project now has to be assessed along those lines, costs versus benefits.
Well, that's right. The environmental costs were very significant. You have to realise, though, that this was a different project compared to all the other projects that are proposed. This was up against the World Heritage Area. So we actually had a more of a mechanism in place to try to we had community engagement, but not to the degree that not full-on community engagement, but at least we had the opportunity to write submissions. With the other 52 projects right down the Great Dividing Range, there is no opportunity for anybody to actually engage with the Environment Minister. So what we'd like to see going forward is all of these other projects to have a better, more of a transparent process. Not that Chalumbin was a transparent process at all, but there needs to be a far better system in place for the approval of these projects, because there's other projects that are just as significant, if not even higher, such as the Mount Fox Energy Park, the Upper Burdekin Wind Farm, there's Moa Creek Wind Farm, Moonlight Range Wind Farm, and Boulder Creek Wind Farm. There's plenty of others that have very significant impacts on biodiversity, yet there is no capacity whatsoever for the community or for scientists or environmental scientists to put a case forward to the minister why that these projects should not proceed.
Well, let's go through those projects in a bit of detail, Steve, because it's important, I think, for people to understand what we're talking about. Upper Burdekin and Mount Fox, both in far north Queensland, both right up against, beautiful rainforest districts, and both in themselves significant areas of vegetation. They surely must now be knocked over on the same basis as Chalumbin.
Well, that's right. If The minister can knock over Chalumbin. He has to knock over Upper Burdekin and Mount Fox because the biodiversity there is actually higher. There's actually more threatened species on those properties. And even a botanist that we engaged recently to study the footprints of these projects across the state, she's identified that actually the Mount Fox Energy Park will impact the most on threatened flora species. So if the minister can knock back Chalumbin, she has to, by default, knock back Mount Fox Energy Park. She has to. Yeah.
Then we go down to, I guess, central Queensland, around the Rockhampton area largely. We're talking about Moa Creek. We're talking about Mount Hopeful, which is approved. They talk about these areas as if they're just sort of, farmland, degraded farmland, but they're not. You and I have flown over those sites in helicopters.
Yes.
In fact, you were flying over Mount Hopeful just a couple of weeks ago. When you get up on those ridges, you see that this is completely unspoilt bushland, right?
Well, that's right. So these projects are going into a country that's actually been untouched. It's because of their rugged terrain and high altitude areas. It's these areas that have escaped industrialisation, urbanisation, and high value agriculture because of the remote access, the hard terrain to get in there. And it's those areas that are now being targeted by the wind industry. And you have to remember, there really isn't much wind in Queensland up the east coast. We're not fortunate like South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania, and some parts of New South Wales where there's good wind. We don't have wind in Queensland up the east coast. We do have wind in central Queensland, out west towards Forsyth and out in central Queensland, but there's no transmission infrastructure going out there. So what's happening with these wind proponents is they're hugging the coastline of Queensland where the existing transmission is, and then trying to seek the high altitude areas adjacent to that transmission line. And it's those high altitude areas that have basically have not been touched over for the last 250 years. It's what we call remnant vegetation, remnant forests, or old growth forests. So these are old growth forests that haven't been touched before, and it's those areas being targeted by the wind industry.
Now, let's talk about Clark Creek. Clark Creek, Twanatugi Forests wind developments. I know you've spent time there, you've examined the wildlife, you say it's very rich in koalas, a lot of koala habitat. Work is underway there, it's well underway, you've had a look at that work. Is it as bad as you thought it was going to be, or worse?
Well, I flew over it 2 weeks ago, and it's actually what I expected. Because I've seen other wind farms or wind factories elsewhere, I know what's involved. I understand the civil earth moving that's required. And if it's hard rock, they even use dynamite. And I only found out a couple of weeks ago, actually, that even on the Caban site, which is a site where you've visited, Nick, they actually blasted out 30,000 or 300,000 cubic metres of rock out of that wind farm site. So I understand the brutal nature of the wind farm industry and the fact that they're in really remote areas, delicate areas, ridge tops, mountain tops. And what they need to do is blast off the tops of those ridge lines and rocky knolls. So it's a very brutal industry on the landscape. And what they're doing there at Clark Creek is horrendous. And they had, there's 20 turbines that have been erected. There's another 30 to go where they've actually physically poured the slabs. But there's 195 turbines going into that site. So I only saw 50 turbines. So there's still another 150 really to be placed into that site. And what I saw was just a very small area. They're pushing another 100 kilometres to the north of where I saw those turbines going in. So it's a really big, vast area. And you don't understand until you get up in the air and you see it from the air, and then you see how big the area is in terms of spatial footprint.
And they are big, these turbines. I flew over northern Finland yesterday on my way here, and you could see turbines clearly visible from 30,000 feet on the ground, because these are big. And Stephen, let's talk about how big they are. A 6 or 7 megawatt wind turbine is probably, what, more than 240, 250 metres tall, including the blades. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yes. So the Caban wind farm is 5.6 megawatt turbines. What we're seeing down at Moa Creek, Boulder Creek, in that central Queensland area, they'll actually be the 6 megawatt turbines. And you're looking at even higher than that, Nick. You're looking up between 250 metres to 290 metres high to the tip of the blade. So very, very, very big towers. And you're also looking at about 400 to 500 cubic metres of reinforced concrete in the ground, slabs, to support that infrastructure.
Just for the benefit of Teal viewers in the city who may be having trouble visualising something 280 metres tall, that is about the height of the Barangaroo Tower, the new Barangaroo Tower where the Crown Casino is. Imagine that amount of height, not in the city, but in the natural environment, in dry tropical forests. You get an idea, don't you, Stephen? That these are massive.
That's
things.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is, the bigger they get, the more earth moving that is required. So the blades are so long that the sweep area either side of the road is very wide. So we're looking at generally 60 metres wide for a lot of these roads that need to cut swathes through the forest to get these big components onto the site. The nacelles, the centre gearboxes, are up around 200 tonne, to give you a sense of size and scale. The cranes that are used to erect the turbines, those cranes alone are 1,000 tonne. It takes 2 days to erect the crane, and then about a week to erect the turbine, then 2 days to pull the crane down again, and then move the crane to the next site. So really, really big and heavy componentry that's required for these wind farms.
Renewable energy in action. Stephen, thank you for all the work you do, and good luck, because I know there's a lot more work to do to save the Queensland countryside.
That's right. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, Nick. Thank you.